Welcome to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. If someone in your life has BPD, you know how difficult it can be, and you need to learn how to heal from those toxic relationships. And that's where this show comes in. Expert education, expert knowledge, expert insight, and delivered with compassion and empathy. With your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, ajmahari. To purchase and book sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. Now your host, ajmahari.
A couple things before we start this episode. I have a website for this podcast, and it's at survivingbpdrelationshipbreakup.com. Interactive website. It's a website is its own feed for the podcast and also for my YouTube channel. So if you'd like to get a lot of the videos that aren't in this podcast, you'd like to check those out, you can do that at survivingbpdrelationshipbreakup.com. I would just like to encourage you to please leave a 5-star rating for this podcast if you find it helpful, to help this podcast keep growing and keep reaching more and more people who could benefit from this content. I get a lot of people with BPD rating it at 1 star because, they have all these problems with what I'm saying, and they think it's horrible and disgusting and all that kind of BPD kind of stuff. Now, let's dive into today's episode. In this episode, I'm going to take a deep dive into something that can be baffling, exhausting, and heartbreaking for those in any relationship type with someone who has borderline personality disorder. The topic in this podcast is BPD Frustration Intolerance. You may have already witnessed it firsthand. The explosive reaction to something minor. The person with BPD's inability to wait. Their impatience. Or the way your partner or loved one or the person with BPD, whoever that may be or have been in your life, seems to unravel when they don't immediately get what they want. Or they get demanding, they act entitled, they get furious, etc. But they just seem to need what they want when they want it. Or else, drama and chaos follows. What I'm talking about is not ordinary irritability or stress. It's something far more deeply rooted in the borderline psyche. And understanding it is key to making sense of why these relationships often feel so chaotic, and really why they're destined to not work out, which so many people still don't want to know yet. So number 1. What is BPD frustration intolerance? Frustration intolerance refers to an inability to cope with obstacles, delays, limits, or disappointments in a regulated way. For the average adult, frustration might be uncomfortable, but it can be tolerated. You may grumble, sigh, or feel upset, but you keep a broader perspective. And a perspective that isn't black or white. Perspective that is paradoxical and in the gray of, wow, I feel really frustrated right now, but that's okay, right? We can cope with it. I feel really frustrated right now. You're feeling it, but you regulate it. And that's what people without personality disorders are able to do, that people with BPD definitely aren't able to do at all. For someone with borderline personality disorder, that tolerance is missing. And again, identity diffusion, lack of known self, how could they have developed tolerance for anything? Because often in early childhood, they're not getting their needs met. They're getting some form of abandonment and or neglect and or abuse. And when we're infants, we definitely need what we need when we need it. Biologically speaking, it's a drive for survival. And that's why, infants scream when they got gas, scream when the diaper's wet, scream when they're hungry. But obviously somebody with borderline personality disorder who yells, rages, gives you the silence treatment or something, every time they don't get what they think they need right in a certain second. So they really don't have the ability to tolerate frustration. Even the smallest frustrations, like a delayed text that isn't arriving when they expect it to arrive, more to the point, a different opinion that makes them feel all wrong or makes them think you think they're wrong, and then they have to, quote, right fight, unquote, a boundary or even just a minor inconvenience usually does feel for people with BPD, just absolutely intolerable. The emotional volume is turned up to 500 on a scale of 100, and the reaction can seem completely out of proportion to what's going on, and it's even out of proportion to the trigger of what is frustrating, what the frustration is about. Number 2, why this happens in BPD. Frustration intolerance is not just immaturity or, quote, spoiled behavior, unquote. It comes from a combination of core features of BPD. Emotional dysregulation, one of those features. People with BPD experience emotions more intensely and have difficulty calming themselves. They don't know how to soothe themselves. A small frustration feels overwhelming because their system escalates it into crisis mode. And the second core feature of BPD that causes frustration intolerance is splitting and black and white thinking. If things don't go their way, it's not just a small setback. It becomes catastrophic. They may view you as suddenly, quote, all bad, unquote, because you represented the frustration, or they believe you caused the frustration. A third core reason for BPD frustration intolerance, early developmental trauma. Many people with BPD never internalized healthy self-soothing strategies in childhood or weren't even taught how to regulate their own emotions. They often grew up in environments where their needs were ignored or invalidated or neglected. So frustration feels like abandonment all over again for people with BPD. The fourth core reason for BPD frustration intolerance is entitlement rooted in desperation. Because of the chronic emptiness and desperation for relief from emotional dysregulation, and sometimes it's emotional terror they're feeling inside. They just don't know what it is, so that's why you always get blamed for it. Their demands for immediate gratification can come across as entitlement, but at its core, it's survival-driven panic. Survival-driven panic in borderline entitlement, often, it doesn't look like panic. You might think, oh no, they just think they're special and they're so entitled because, but they're putting across this desperate panic of what looks like entitlement in a very defensive posture. So it doesn't look like they're really emotionally suffering at all, but they are. But then they just sort of like run over that, if you will, with the splitting, the alloplastic defenses, the egosyntonic reality of whatever they're going to say or do next. They feel like it's absolutely justified and right. And it's all going to happen really impulsively and really quickly. But they are super guarded and protected when they're showing the, quote, entitlement, unquote, of the desperate panic that they're feeling inside. But they don't want anybody to see that a lot of the time. And that would be the difference often between when a borderline has entitlement and when a narcissist has entitlement. And because for people with BPD, as I just said, but at core, this entitlement is a survival-driven panic. I'm not saying it makes their behavior or what they do okay. There's just a differentiation there. Number 3, how frustration intolerance shows up in relationships. If you love someone with BPD, you likely have seen this dynamic play out in painful ways. How BPD frustration intolerance shows up? Well, I'm going to list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ways. So the first way is explosive anger at small things. A late text reply turns into accusations of betrayal. The second reason, impatience with boundaries. Saying, quote, no, unquote, or, quote, not now, unquote, often triggers meltdowns. Sulking, silent treatment, or rage. And the fourth thing is constant crisis. The inability to tolerate frustration means life becomes a string of, quote, emergencies, unquote. The fourth way that frustration intolerance shows up in relationships, demand for immediate soothing. You may feel pressured to constantly fix, rescue, or reassure them just to keep the peace. Only most of the time you even try to do that. Trying to soothe them doesn't really work because they really can't be soothed. Maybe sometimes, maybe a little bit, but very temporarily, and people with BPD do not know how to soothe themselves at all if they're untreated. The fifth way that BPD frustration intolerance shows up in relationships, escalation into chaos and betrayal cycles. When their frustration tolerance shatters, and that could be any minute because they really don't have any, the fallout can be dramatic. Screaming, raging, threats, emotional withdrawal, reckless behaviors, a lot of impulsivity in this. This ties directly into the chaos betrayal cycle many partners have gone through or still going through. Number 4, the false promise inside the BPD frustration intolerance cycle. There's also a cruel illusion embedded in this pattern. Each time a loved one gives in to the borderline's frustration by trying to smooth things over, trying to soothe the person with BPD, trying to appease them, trying to meet a need, apologizing, or rushing to meet their demands, it feels like the crisis has been averted. You might think, oh, peace is restored and it'll be okay. No, it's so temporary, and you really haven't restored peace, and you really haven't soothed them. Might have helped a little, but you didn't really avert anything, except maybe like for a moment, because it's all going to happen again. But it's a false promise, because the real issue, the inability for the person with BPD to tolerate frustration, never gets resolved. The cycle repeats: demand, meltdown, rescue, maybe some temporary calm, and then another explosion, or silent treatment with a quiet borderline. Over time, this wears down the loved one's sense of any fantasy of safety or stability, and it locks you deeper into the trauma bond. And the 5th point here, the emotional toll that BPD frustration intolerance takes on loved ones. For a partner, family member, friend, favorite person, living with this, with someone with BPD, is exhausting. You end up walking on eggshells, trying to prevent the next eruption, feeling guilty and responsible for their reactions as if you caused the storm, because they'll blame you and say you did, but you didn't. Losing your own voice and boundaries, if you have any boundaries. Some people don't in these relationships, because saying no feels too anxiety-producing and or dangerous. And it affects you in ways too, because becoming trauma bonded, and it's increasing the trauma bond every time you go around the cycle of an eruption based on BPD frustration intolerance, because the cycles of chaos and temporary calm mimic addictive highs and lows. The toll is immense. Anxiety, depression, self-blame, toxic guilt, maybe even toxic shame, all that they blame you for, can feel shaming to you, and even physical stress and or it's going to be hurting your emotional and psychological health and like maybe your physical health. And the other thing too is you're losing yourself through each and every one of these cyclical episodes. And 6, why does BPD frustration intolerance make the relationship unsustainable? The hard truth is this: frustration intolerance in BPD relationships doesn't just create difficulty, it makes stability virtually impossible. Because if a person cannot handle the everyday frustrations of life without exploding, attacking, or withdrawing, and punishing and seeking revenge, then any relationship with them will be dominated by chaos, drama, fear, and resentment. It will become a battleground. Loved ones often cling to the hope that if they love enough, give enough, soothe quickly enough, pay enough attention, validate enough, or explain gently enough, things will improve. But what you're really doing is managing the symptoms of borderline frustration intolerance without addressing the root problem, which you can't address, and you can't make them go to therapy to address, a problem that only professional treatment and personal responsibility on the borderline's part can begin to change. Not that it changes quickly in therapy. It takes quite a lot of work, because BPD frustration intolerance has been a thing for people who have BPD usually since infancy, but definitely early childhood. And each and every time you do all that, you're doing all this giving, and you're trying to soothe them, and you're trying to settle them down, and you're just trying to get the whole big reactionary shebang, horrible, whatever's going on to stop. It's exhausting, takes a toll on you, you're losing yourself more, and you're only, unfortunately, enabling that person with BPD to stay the same. And the next time they have a frustration and they can't tolerate it, boom, it all happens again. And like, it can be things like they text you, okay? Maybe it's the middle of your workday and they text you. You maybe always try to get back to them right away, but sometimes you can't. Why would you need to get back to them right away? Well, that's a pattern that you might have recognized. Like, they don't do well if you don't get back to them right away. And it's BPD frustration intolerance. The other thing, too, though, because, yes, it does feel like abandonment to them, and you don't care anymore, and all that stuff immediately, impulsively, and often not even consciously, though they'll say those words. The other thing about BPD frustration intolerance being another core issue within people with BPD is that when you're trying to satiate all of that, and you really can't, you're enabling them to stay the same. And that means that you're abandoning yourself and you're losing yourself. And so in closing, BPD frustration intolerance is one of the clearest signs of why these relationships often collapse under their own weight. It's not your fault. You cannot love someone enough to give them frustration tolerance. Can't change a person with BPD. Can't rescue a person with BPD. Can't fix a person with BPD. Can't even demand they go to therapy. Well, you can try to demand they go to therapy, but often even if you think you've gotten them into therapy, they're not in the correct therapy. They're not engaging the therapy. And unfortunately in therapy, they can learn to weaponize a lot of stuff. Triangulate you with a therapist and things get worse, not better, often. I'm not saying always. But you shouldn't sort of like keep investing in a relationship that requires you to practically demand somebody goes to therapy to try to make it work. Because again, them going to therapy and starting therapy, well, that might be good for them in like 8 to 10 years, but it's not something to hang your hat on keeping this relationship going. That's codependent denial. What can you do when they're experiencing this frustration intolerance? Take a step back. Don't try so hard to make it all okay. Leave them with it, I guess. Protect your own boundaries. Recognize that the endless cycles of chaos need not be a normal burden for you to carry. And yet, that'll feel impossible in a relationship. You can try to take a deep breath, remind yourself of your worth, but you won't be doing that because you're abandoning yourself. And the more you're trying to settle them down and calm them down and walking on the eggshells and trying to make all this reactionary stuff from BPD frustration intolerance, you're trying to make it go away, and it's never going to go away. And you want it to go away in the moment. You're just abandoning yourself to try to control somebody else to make it work. And as always, take care.
You've been listening to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast with your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, ajmahari. For more or get sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. See you next time.